On March 27, 1977, aviation history witnessed what remains the deadliest accident in commercial aviation. In just a few seconds, 583 people lost their lives. But what makes this disaster so terrifying is that it wasn't caused by one single mistake. It was a chain of small errors, misunderstandings, pressure, and bad timing that came together at exactly the wrong moment. The story begins in the Canary Islands, a group of islands belonging to Spain. One of them is Gran Canaria, home to Las Palmas Airport. On that afternoon, two men entered the airport carrying a suitcase. Inside it was a bomb. The airport was crowded, and nobody paid much attention to the strange ticking sound coming from the suitcase. The two men quietly left the suitcase inside the terminal near a flower shop and walked out through the main entrance. Around 40 minutes later, an unknown caller contacted the airport and warned that bombs had been planted inside the terminal. The caller told them to evacuate the building immediately, then hung up. The airport operator was alarmed and immediately contacted the airline authorities. But before she could even finish explaining what had happened, a massive explosion tore through the flower shop. Smoke filled the terminal, part of the ceiling collapsed, and terrified passengers ran in every direction. People were injured, but remarkably, nobody was killed by the explosion itself. What happened next, however, would turn a terrorist attack into the deadliest accident in aviation history. Investigators discovered that the bombing was connected to the Payak separatist group, which was fighting for independence for the Canary Islands. But at that moment, authorities had a much more immediate problem. The caller had warned about bombs, plural. The entire airport had to be searched. Passengers were evacuated, the airport was shut down, and aircraft that were already approaching Las Palmas were ordered to remain in the air. 6 flights were waiting to land, but they couldn't stay airborne forever. Eventually, authorities decided to divert them to Tenerife, an island only about 20 minutes away by air. Tenerife's Los Rodeos airport was never designed to handle this many large aircraft at once. But suddenly, multiple wide-body jets were being sent there. Among them was Pan Am Flight 1736, carrying hundreds of passengers, and KLM Flight 4805, carrying 234 passengers. The KLM aircraft was commanded by Captain Jacob van Zanten, one of KLM's most experienced pilots and its chief flight instructor. He was famous within the airline and had spent years training other pilots. His first officer was Jacob Mers, essentially a student who had been certified by Van Zanten himself. The third member of the cockpit crew was flight engineer Willem Schroeder. At around 1:38 p.m., KLM 4805 landed at Tenerife. About 40 minutes later, Pan Am 1736 also landed. But Los Rodeos was a difficult airport. There was no ground radar. The control tower couldn't directly see every aircraft moving around the airport. Controllers had to rely heavily on radio communication and reports from pilots. The airport also had a single runway and a parallel taxiway, and the surrounding mountains often produced thick clouds and fog. Visibility could change rapidly. Then another problem appeared. The KLM crew was under significant time pressure. European flight duty regulations were strict, and Captain Van Zanten was concerned about exceeding his legal duty limit. If they couldn't depart soon enough, the crew might have to remain in Tenerife and arrange a replacement crew. Van Zanten contacted KLM headquarters to determine how much time they had left. He was told that if they could take off within roughly the next hour, they should be fine. Otherwise, the situation could become much more complicated. The original plan was to fly to Las Palmas, refuel there, pick up passengers, and continue to Amsterdam. But Van Zanten came up with another idea. Instead of waiting to refuel at Las Palmas, why not refuel the KLM aircraft right there in Tenerife? That would save time. So the KLM aircraft began refueling. Pan Am 1736 was positioned behind it. Then, just a few minutes after KLM started refueling, the message came through: the search at Las Palmas was complete. No second bomb had been found. The airport was reopening. If that message had arrived just a few minutes earlier, KLM might never have started refueling in Tenerife. But now the refueling operation was already underway, and it would take around 30 minutes. Pan Am had no reason to refuel. But because the KLM 747 was blocking its path, Pan Am was effectively trapped behind it. The Pan Am crew considered trying to taxi around the KLM aircraft. They sent crew members outside to check whether there was enough space. There wasn't. The gap was too narrow for the huge Boeing 747 to safely pass. So Pan Am had no choice but to wait. Meanwhile, the KLM passengers were waiting inside the terminal. One passenger, a young woman named Rabina, became frustrated with the delay. Her boyfriend lived near the airport, and she eventually left the terminal to meet him. She would become one of the very few people connected to the KLM flight who survived the disaster. Her decision to leave the airport would later become one of the most haunting stories connected to the crash. While all of this was happening, KLM finished refueling. The aircraft had taken on approximately 55,000 liters of fuel, making the already massive Boeing 747 significantly heavier. That extra weight would become critical. At approximately 4:54 p.m., refueling was complete. And almost immediately, the weather began to deteriorate. Fog rolled across the airport. Visibility that had been around 2,000 meters suddenly dropped to only a few hundred meters. Now the situation was extremely dangerous. The control tower couldn't see the aircraft. The pilots couldn't see each other. There was no ground radar. And everyone had to rely on radio communication. The plan was simple on paper. KLM would taxi onto the runway, travel to the far end, turn around 180 degrees, and prepare for takeoff. Pan Am would follow behind it. But Pan Am wasn't supposed to remain on the runway. It was instructed to taxi along the runway and exit through the third taxiway, known as C3. The problem was that the Pan Am crew wasn't completely sure which exit the controller had mentioned. The controller's English, combined with a Spanish accent and poor radio conditions, created confusion. The crew discussed whether they had heard the first, third, or fourth taxiway. And because the fog was so thick, they couldn't simply look outside and identify the exits. There was another problem. C3 required a very sharp turn for a massive Boeing 747. C4 offered a much easier turn. So the Pan Am crew decided that perhaps the controller had meant C4. They continued down the runway looking for it. At around 5:05 p.m., another warning sign appeared: the runway centerline lighting was out of service. The limited visual guidance they had was disappearing. At the same time, KLM had reached the end of the runway and turned around. The aircraft was now facing directly down the runway. Pan Am was somewhere ahead of it, still trying to find the correct exit. Then came the moment that changed aviation forever. Before an aircraft can legally take off, the crew needs the appropriate air traffic clearance and then a specific takeoff clearance. The rule is simple: no takeoff without takeoff clearance. But Captain Van Zanten was under enormous pressure. He began advancing the throttles. His first officer immediately questioned the move. They did not have takeoff clearance. Van Zanten stopped. The first officer contacted ATC and received the necessary route clearance. But the actual takeoff clearance had still not been given. Then Van Zanten released the brakes. The aircraft began moving. His words were essentially, "We're going." The KLM 747 was accelerating down the runway in dense fog without takeoff clearance. The first officer urgently transmitted, "We're now at takeoff." But the controller interpreted the message differently, as if the aircraft was merely ready for takeoff. The controller responded with an instruction telling KLM to stand by. At almost exactly the same moment, the Pan Am crew transmitted a crucial warning: they were still taxiing down the runway. That message could have saved hundreds of lives. But something extraordinary happened. The two radio transmissions overlapped. Because the radio system could not clearly transmit two people speaking simultaneously, the signals interfered with each other. Instead of hearing the warning clearly, the KLM cockpit heard a burst of interference. The critical message never reached the crew. Then the controller transmitted another message asking Pan AM to report when the runway was clear. Inside the KLM cockpit, flight engineer Willem Schroeder heard the communication and asked Captain Van Zanten whether Pan AM was still on the runway. Van Zanten answered before the question was fully completed. He believed the runway was clear. It wasn't. At 5:06 p.m., KLM reached decision speed. At that point, stopping the aircraft was no longer realistically possible. Meanwhile, Pan AM was still moving through the fog, searching for its exit. Then the crew saw two lights in the distance. At first, they thought it might be the KLM aircraft waiting at the end of the runway. But the lights were getting larger. Much larger. They realized the lights were moving toward them. KLM was coming straight at them. The Pan AM crew immediately tried to escape. They applied full power and attempted to turn the enormous Boeing 747 to the left. But a 340-ton aircraft cannot change direction like a car. The Pan AM aircraft barely began moving out of the way. At the same time, the KLM crew finally saw the Pan AM aircraft. Captain Van Zanten pulled back hard on the controls, trying to lift the nose over the other 747. The aircraft began to climb, but the extra fuel had made it significantly heavier. The nose rose. The tail did not clear the runway. The aircraft's tail struck the ground. Van Zanten's final recorded words were reportedly an exclamation of alarm. Seconds later, at approximately 5:06 p.m., KLM 4805 collided with Pan AM 1736. The KLM 747's nose passed over the Pan AM aircraft, but its engines and landing gear tore through the upper portion of the Pan AM 747. The enormous amount of fuel aboard both aircraft ignited. The result was catastrophic. The KLM aircraft was destroyed. Pan AM was torn apart and engulfed in flames. A total of 583 people died. Only 61 people aboard Pan AM survived. And even then, the tragedy continued. Because the airport had been dealing with the earlier bombing threat, emergency responders were initially confused about what had happened. Some feared that another bomb might have caused the explosion. The response was delayed at a critical moment. Meanwhile, something almost unbelievable happened. The fog began to lift shortly after the collision. Visibility improved dramatically only minutes after the crash. The accident had occurred in a tiny window of terrible conditions. If the fog had lifted just a few minutes earlier, the crews might have seen each other. If KLM had not refueled at Tenerife, the aircraft would have been lighter. If Pan AM had been able to leave the runway earlier, the collision might never have happened. If the radio transmissions had not overlapped, the warning might have reached KLM. If the flight engineer's concern had been taken seriously, the takeoff might have been stopped. There wasn't one single cause. There was a chain. And that chain became one of the most important lessons in aviation history. The investigation eventually found that Captain Van Zanten had initiated the takeoff without receiving takeoff clearance. But the disaster wasn't simply about blaming one pilot. Investigators also examined the airport, air traffic control, weather, radio communication, taxiway layout, workload, time pressure, and cockpit culture. At the time, the captain's authority inside the cockpit was enormous. The captain was often treated as the unquestioned final authority. For a first officer or flight engineer to directly challenge a highly respected senior captain could be extremely difficult. And that culture had consequences. The KLM first officer knew they did not have takeoff clearance. The flight engineer had concerns about whether the runway was clear. But neither was able to stop the captain. After Tenerife, aviation began changing. Cockpit crews were increasingly trained to communicate openly and challenge decisions when necessary. This philosophy eventually became a central part of crew resource management, or CRM. Today, pilots are trained that questioning a captain isn't disrespectful when safety is at stake. It's a responsibility. Air traffic procedures also became more precise. Communication standards were strengthened. Airport ground operations became safer. And technologies such as ground radar and improved surface movement systems became increasingly important. The Tenerife disaster demonstrated something aviation would never forget. Experience alone does not make a system safe. Highly trained professionals can still make mistakes when they're operating under pressure, inside a flawed system, with incomplete information. That afternoon, nobody woke up intending to cause a disaster. But time pressure, poor visibility, communication problems, assumptions, authority gradients, and a series of small decisions came together within a few minutes. And the result was catastrophic. The Tenerife airport disaster remains a powerful reminder that aviation safety is built on layers of protection. Every clearance matters. Every confirmation matters. Every challenge matters. And sometimes, the most important words a pilot can say are simply, "Stop. Something isn't right." Because the safety rules passengers sometimes find frustrating, the delays, the repeated confirmations, the waiting for clearance, the pilots double-checking everything, exist for a reason. They were written through painful lessons. And Tenerife became one of the clearest examples of that truth. In aviation, there is an old saying, safety rules are written in blood. On March 27, 1977, 583 lives became part of aviation history. And their story continues to shape the way the world flies today. On March 27,